like all we're really trying to do is help people practice being more sensitive to their surroundings, to their inner surroundings and to their outer surroundings. We're helping people build awareness and trying to help them feel comfortable being fully awake in every moment of their life, which is kind of a drawing.
Welcome to the Mindspace podcast. I'm Joe Flanders. Thanks for tuning in. So the holiday season is upon us, and for many of us, the spiritual origins of these holidays are long buried in the secular routines like turkey dinners, online shopping sessions, and gift giving. And yet, the winter solstice and the transition to a new calendar year offer perfectly good opportunities to reflect on what is deep and even sacred in our lives. And so the question is, how do we connect with what is wholesome this time of year in an impoverished spiritual landscape? I can think of no better context for an episode on what is known as the God molecule. 5-MeO-DMT is arguably the most entheogenic or spiritual of the psychedelic compounds in vogue these days. And my guest today is among the leading experts on this very strange corner of the psychedelic universe. Steve Rio is a social impact entrepreneur working to raise consciousness, performance, and wellness. He and his wife are the co-founders of the Enfold Institute, where they host 5-MeO-DMT retreats near Vancouver, British Columbia. Our conversation covered what 5-MeO-DMT is, Steve's own experience with 5-MeO, and how it informs his very pragmatic and accessible view of spirituality, the role of 5-MeO in spiritual experiences, Steve's view of 5-MeO as a tool for energizing areas of our lives that are aligned and bringing clarity to other areas where we're stuck. We also talked about the role of public institutions in regulating psychedelics and spirituality, and the current breakdown in trust in these institutions and the increasing importance of grassroots communities in backfilling their functions. And finally, we talked about the design of Enfold's 5-MeO retreats, including their approach to preparation and integration. And without any further delay, here is my conversation with Steve Rio. Steve Rio, welcome to the Mindspace podcast.
Thanks, Joe. Excited to be here.
How's the day so far?
The day is good. Mostly administrative stuff, all the exciting background of being a guide and doing work in this space. So just kind of getting things cleaned up. It's been a really busy few months. So excited that it's Friday.
I want you to know that I'm drinking tea here because I feel I need to be sharp and clear for this one.
Nice.
What do you think of that?
Well, whatever you need to keep up with this conversation, I'm in for. I'm just kidding, but I don't drink caffeine. Joe, everyone should know that Joe and I have a bit of a rapport around this kind of thing, but I personally try to stay away from caffeine for the most part because it gets me a little too accelerated. So I'm sharp enough as it is. And then when sharpness becomes just like aggression, it's not cool.
Right. And I know that from experience. You do not want to get on Steve's dark side. That's for sure. All right. Let's be serious here. Yeah. Steve, tell us what you do and how you got onto this kind of like healing thing that you're doing these days.
Yeah. So I do a lot of different things, but I'd say it's all centered around helping people access and increase their access to consciousness, kind of upgrade consciousness to also help people increase capacity and resilience and wellness. And then I think inside of that, also really trying to help people with sense making and with just enjoying the trip of this very complex life that we're living. Yeah.
That's cool. Can you give a, maybe a more sort of conventional answer is like, what do you do when you wake up in the morning? Like, do you have a job? What's your background? Or I know you've done a bunch of stuff. Like you're a musician, you're a sound engineer, you're consultant, you're a mindfulness teacher, you're
all those things. So like my background, well, I was a musician, kind of my first, up until my mid-20s, I was a musician, sort of full-time, and playing a whole bunch of different styles of music and trying to make a go of that. I also got into technology and design in my early 20s, and that sort of became my second career. And so spent a number of years, like I've got about 20 years of technology experience, of design experience, and then a solid decade of that doing high-level strategy with organizations, primarily in the social sector and in social impact work. So really my whole working career has been focused in social impact. And I guess the thread in my personal life that leads us to where we are today is really around my own personal wellness, my own personal development, exploring psychology and wellness and performance and consciousness and all of these things. And in the last, I'd say 5 or so years, that's become sort of forefront of what I'm doing. So a few years ago, we launched a product called Nature of Work. It's an 8-week wellness program for modern work. Kind of takes people through all aspects of how to engage with technology, how to structure time, how to build attention, sort of the attention muscle, and how to basically manage the dopamine rushes we have all around us all the time, and be a higher performing person that feels better throughout the day. And then in the last few years, we've begun doing psychedelic work, so psychedelic retreats, coaching, integration work, breath work, all sorts of aspects around altered state.
And when you say we, this is you and your partner?
Yeah, that's right. My wife and I, yeah.
Cool. So the, we could talk about many of the things that you've just listed there, but the purpose of today is to talk about 5-MeO-DMT and the work you're doing with your wife at your institute there. So let's start with 5-MeO-DMT. What is 5-MeO-DMT? And what is it? Yeah, let's start with what is it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting question these days because I think a lot of people are hearing about it through different cultural references, which is exciting and frightening at the same time. It's really interesting hearing, Joe Rogan talk a lot about it. Mike Tyson, I feel like, is the has been probably the most prolific voice of 5-MeO recently. He's constantly talking about smoking the toad, and it's been really engaging to see his journey. But 5-MeO is basically, as far as we know, the strongest psychedelic on the planet. We work with a synthetic version of 5-MeO, but it's originally found in the venom of the Sonoran desert toad. And that was discovered sometime, I think, in the 60s, or like there's no long lineage with 5-MeO like a lot of the other psychedelics where there's, say, 1,000 years or thousands of years of lineage. Really, it was discovered fairly recently by an American guy. And so it was originally found in the Sonoran desert toad. So when people talk about smoking the toad, they're talking about smoking the venom of this specific toad. Now, this toad is effectively is becoming extinct pretty quickly. So most people working with 5-MeO today are now working with synthetic, so like a pure molecule, lab-made molecule. And it's in some ways I would categorize it in the same category as all the other psychedelics. In other ways, I have to sort of put it in its own category just because the experience is so different. It's so much stronger, but it's also just, it just doesn't have a lot of the characteristics that you generally think about or hear about when you think about psilocybin or ayahuasca, where there's a lot of visuals and a lot of story and a lot of, all these kind of like all the psychedelia. Like 5-MeO feels like it goes right through all of that to a much more pronounced experience. So there's lots of different areas we could go into that. Yeah.
I think that 5-MeO-DMT has become like a household name in the psychedelic community. But I want to bring myself back anyway to like the first time I heard about this, because it's really bizarre, right? So what you're telling me is that there's a toad, hopping around out there in the Sonoran Desert.
Yeah.
And this toad has a venom, which I understand is released when there's a predator or some irritant kind of nearby, and just like squirts out this white substance, and it paralyzes and or kills this other animal,
or makes them very high.
Well, do we know actually what happens to the animals that are affected by this?
No, we actually don't. It's so new and it's so interesting. Like basically what happened is these toads were discovered by Ken Nelson, aka Albert Most, but they've so quickly been eradicated by the popularity around them and just by people going for them. So I don't know how much research has actually been done on the toad and how what's happening there.
So my assumption was that the psychoactive properties for the human brain were sort of idiosyncratic. It's like this weird side effect, but the effect, this is like a defense mechanism for an animal that can be a prey to like a snake or an insect or whatever.
Right.
And so anyway, that remains to be discovered.
Yeah.
So this thing's hopping around. It has this defense, and somehow Ken Nelson discovered, and if you know anything about how he discovered this, I'd love to hear it, that when you smoke this substance, presumably he figured out you need to like dry it out first or something. You smoke the substance and it's like profoundly consciousness altering in a really, really interesting way.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Well, so Ken Nelson basically became fascinated with the idea of a psychedelic toad. Like he was an interesting guy. Like he was always researching things and doing all this kind of stuff. So he was very interested in this idea. He was in the army for a little while. I think he was in the army. Anyway, he found the research from an Italian chemist who had been basically looking at venoms of all the venomous toads that they could find and indexing just all the molecular and chemical components of their venom. So he came across the information that there was 5-MeO DMT in this toad somewhere. And it happened to be, this guy was living in Texas, so it wasn't too far from him. These toads are really generally found in the Arizona-Mexico border, kind of in that region through that desert. And so he became fascinated by, and people hadn't really been talking about 5-MeO DMT, but obviously they were familiar with DMT. And so he sought this out and basically was, as far as we know, the first person to really find this toad, extract the venom, and realize what he had found.
Okay, so what I just learned is that 5-MeO DMT exists elsewhere. It just happens to be in the Sonoran Desert toad. Where else do you find 5-MeO DMT?
As far as it's found endogenously, so it's found in the human body. It's produced in the human body, just like DMT is. I mean, I think that research is fairly novel, and I don't know that we're super clear on what's going on there, but there is some trace amounts of it in the body. It's also found in a few other plants, but in very low amounts. So there's no plant you could go pick and smoke and find have enough 5-MeO in it. One of the plants is called Varola resin, I believe. What's interesting is that plant, one of the plants with 5-MeO is very prevalent in the areas around where the origins of like the Judeo-Christian religions were formed. This plant was abundant in those areas. So who knows what that means? It's just interesting. Yeah.
Okay. So through this really interesting and as yet to be elucidated history, this compound finds its way into the hands of this guy. And he publishes this manual or something. Can you tell us the story of that thing?
Well, yeah. So I have like a reprint of it. So in the I think it was 1980, early 1980s. So just after I was born, I guess. He published this in 1983. So he published this little manual. This is a reprint that was done by Hamilton Morris, Morrison or Morris? I can't remember.
Morris.
Yeah, Hamilton Morris from basically to help support Ken Nelson, because he had found Ken Nelson just before he died, and was to raise some money for him and basically to put this information out in the world. So he published this pamphlet. It has like it has all these drawings of how to milk the toad and how to find them and all this information, and these illustrations that his friend had done about what the experience was like. And so anyway, he published this, but this was in the 80s. So that was the first information, and he was handing it out at, I don't know where he was handing it out, but he would print a bunch of these, print them himself, and then go hand them out at conferences or fairs and things like that. And that's how this started to become on the radar. And that was really like to say the early 80s. And what's interesting is that we'd already gone through the prohibition of most psychedelics in the US. This was discovered kind of post that prohibition. And a lot of folks, a lot of the kind of old timers that were doing research down in California and all this kind of stuff, they started to be aware of 5-MeO, but they agreed to keep it as underground as possible because of what had already happened, like with LSD and other substances. So they codenamed it Jaguar, and they all agreed that they wouldn't publish anything about it. And so what's interesting is 5-MeO DMT remained off the radar of the DEA until 2007, when it was, I think it was 2007, when it was then regulated in the US. It's still unregulated in Canada. Again, largely because it's just flown under the radar and been fairly elusive to everybody. Yeah.
Okay. Again, to someone who's discovering the story for the first time, such a bizarre thing. I sort of feel like one needs to know what it does to human consciousness to understand why it's popular and why it sort of has this kind of cult following now. So what kinds of experiences have you had on it? And have you seen some of your guests at your retreat center have some of the experiences they've had?
Yeah. And so, to set this up a little bit, I've had very high dose experiences with psilocybin, with MDMA, I've had experience with LSD. I've had ayahuasca experiences. So I've experienced kind of the major. I've also smoked DMT directly. So I've experienced kind of that. So just to set the stage, like in terms of my own experience, I've had a lot of experience with different psychedelics in fairly high dose. A dear friend of mine who will remain unnamed, but just an incredible human in our lives, one of our soul brothers, he basically started telling me about 5-MeO and saying, you got to do it, you got to come do it. And he was just, constantly trying to get me to these sessions he was setting up with this guy. And at first I was a little bit, I don't know, it sounds pretty intense, and at that time, even 3-4 years ago, there was so little information about 5-MeO online. If you went online, what you'd find, there's a few videos of this Mexican doctor / shaman kind of guy who became very popular. But he was doing pretty scary stuff with 5-MeO, the way he was administering it. So you'd find videos of him like dosing people and holding them up and then dropping them in a river. And it was like, just seems super intense. I was like, I don't know about this, but anyway.
That actually sounds like the footage that Hamilton Morris showed on his episode where he looked into 5-MeO. Is that the same guy?
Same guy, Dr. Octavio Reddick, I think is his name. And he was sort of the first. He's a very eloquent, kind of good looking Mexican Jesus kind of looking guy, and has doctor credentials and is just really sort of shamanic. And so he was great personality for TV and for, for YouTube. He has a really specific style that actually is carried forward in a lot of Mexican providers. But he was had this very aggressive approach. Like he would hold, have you standing when you took this medicine, and this medicine is strong enough, we'll get into this, that it effectively you're unconscious. So he'd kind of hold you up and then drop you down. And oftentimes he was doing things like pouring water down people's nose and throat to kind of create a choking response. And I don't know why and what that was all about. But anyway, he had a really aggressive approach. And so those was kind of the first things we would see. So even before, I think the Hamilton Morris episode, I don't remember when that came out, but anyway, like we'd see these kind of things. So it took a while to get us to the mat, I guess is the long story short.
Mm-hmm.
We finally had our first experience, and I really have to say, like, my first 5-MeO experience is there's like a before me and an after me through that experience. Like there was just it was such an awakening moment. It was so profound. It was so intense that it just really shifted the trajectory of my life. and I think all psychedelics have had, like, I know that my early mushroom experiences, which was a long time ago, also really influenced the view I have on how life works and what's going on here, and, you know, really helped shape my perspective. But this was just so profound and so intense. You know, it was like I died and I was reborn, and it was just, it was so beautiful. And it kind of just like, it shook me up in a way that it sort of just helped to accelerate a lot of things that were already kind of momentous in my life, but the momentum just increased. Like, I always talk to people about this. Like, I feel like what 5-MeO and what often psychedelics in general will do, 5-MeO being a really strong catalyst for this, is that where you are aligned, that alignment just is so much clearer. And it's like, it clears the path, and you can just move more clearly and more directly towards that. Where you have misalignment, or where things are not, you know, you're not feeling,
integrated
or whatever, those things just become more clear to you as well. So you just start to dismantle those, you start to work those out. So for me, I was, you know, I had been thinking about selling my company and moving into the work we're doing for a number of years. But it had always felt like there was all these external barriers to doing so. Like, I can't sell my company for this reason, or this needs to happen, or, you know, there's all these kind of things. I loved the company, but I just was no longer passionate about it. And I knew it was time to hand the reins over to somebody else. Within 6 months, the deal was done, and I got exactly what I had hoped for in terms of selling it. It was a great transition. The buyer was the perfect person to take over the company. Like, it just was so smooth and obvious. As soon as I had this experience, like, all of these dominoes just began to fall. And so it's just really, it was just such a powerful experience. And it just led us to really want to get into this work. I'd say the other side of that was that our first few experiences with 5-MeO really didn't feel like they were properly held. There was no preparation. I never even met the guide or talked to the guide before we showed up. You know, my buddy was kind of telling us what it was like, you know, just as a friend. So we had some instinct, but really we didn't know what we were getting into, and there was no follow-up. And it was kind of this experience where we showed up to this place. You know, we parked our car, we did this experience. And then about an hour and a half later, he says, "Hey guys, I know, like, you're really kind of basking in this experience, but I need you to move your car because the next people are here." Right. And for us, so my wife and I, we both have a pretty deep meditation practice. We're fairly grounded in our personal development. So we, you know, for us, it wasn't jarring. But we had other friends there that it was fairly jarring. So we kind of scooped them up and brought them back to our place, to our property. And we just hung out and made food and, you know, did kind of a natural peer integration process. But those first few experiences really also showed me the power of this medicine and the potential of it, and the responsibility that goes along with it, what's required. And that's true for all psychedelics. But in this case, I think a lot of people hear that, oh, it's only 10 minutes and then you're totally sober afterwards. And it can kind of, you know, the transactional part of your brain goes, okay, that's easy. I got 10 minutes. But there's such a profound download that you really need the time to process. So that's what led us to start developing, you know, our retreat format, and thinking about really having people with us in our home, on our property, for a few days at a time when they're going to have this experience. And that's really shaped all the work that we do at Enfold.
So Steve, again, for people that maybe don't have a lot of psychedelic experience, or, you know, thought they'd be listening to a podcast about well-being in some sense, and we're like way off the deep end here. maybe I'd love you to just say a little bit more about that first experience, or even whatever experiences you've had. Use the word like intense, profound, reborn. Like, what the hell does that mean? What, like, you smoke this thing,
Yeah.
and then what happens? Like,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's fair. That's a fair question. What happens? And I want to talk about two things, because I think a lot of people get caught up in the trippiness of what psychedelics are. And, I can describe like what happens, and it sounds, remarkable, and it's a great story. I think what's more important about psychedelics, especially to your wellness listeners that are wondering what the heck we're talking about here, is like, why do this? Like, besides having a trippy experience, what's this about, and what happens? Like, what happens after psychedelics, and what does psychedelics help us with? So first off, when I talk about my experience with 5-MeO, I also just have to say that everybody has very different experiences with 5-MeO. It really depends on the personal development work and where you've been, the levels of trauma and other things you may be dealing with or have in your past, just your current mental, physical, spiritual state coming into the experience, the set and setting of it. There's lots of factors that impact this. So for instance, when we're talking to potential people who will come have the experience with us, I don't talk at all about what it's going to be like, because all I can really say about what it's going to be like is kind of the mechanics of the experience and the intensity of the experience. But people experience this in lots of different ways. My experience personally was this exceptionally profound. Like, basically, you inhale this, you inhale we vaporize and you inhale it. We count down from 10, and by the time we're at 5, 4, 3, it is basically at 100% strength. So it has come on very quickly. Most people experience that as some kind of like wave of colors or fractals or white light, or it's just like something just washes over you very, very quickly. And we're talking about like the biggest dose that we do. So we can talk about the staging of doses after that. But in this, it's basically strong enough that it renders you unconscious for a few minutes. So my first experience, I just basically washed over with white light, and then I was gone. There was no me. And then however long I was out, there's no sense of time and space. So, I was out for however long I was. In reality, it's a few minutes, when you're observing somebody doing this, it's a few minutes. And then you start to have the first remembrance that there's a you, like, oh yeah, like I don't know, you just start to be aware of time and space again. Your ego is just starting to come back online after being completely dissolved. And in that moment, you begin the processing of this download of what you've been shown. And what you've been shown really comes out differently for everybody. For me, it was seeing the entire universe as a single instant, as a single expression, completely contained. And, all of life, all of everything as one thing. It was like, going to a movie that explains the entire universe, but it was 1 second long and it was just white light. And it's really hard to describe, but it's like this incredible, this will help kind of add context to that. So I'm processing this. I'm trying to make sense of this. And then I just start belly laughing, and I'm laughing like, and my wife said she'd never heard me laugh like that. We'd been together for, I don't know, 6, 7 years at that point. And she said she never heard me laugh like that. And I was laughing because it was so funny to me that I'd ever worried about anything in my life, just seeing how perfect the whole universe is, seeing this whole expression. And the laughing could have been crying, because there was also a lot of grief in that laugh, in like, wow, I've been so hard on myself. I thought that life was so like that I had to grind away so hard, and I always had to push to get what I wanted, and all these, you're just bouncing, like you're going through all these different aspects of your life. It's very much like a near-death experience where in some ways, your life flashes before you and you experience different aspects. So I just processing that. And then you're just kind of like, you're slowly coming back into 3D, coming back into time and space. And within about 25, 30 minutes, you're sort of back to baseline. You have this kind of wild glow about you because you've just been shown the keys to the universe kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But that was my experience. And I can also say for others, their experience, they experience that. They don't experience the white light. They don't experience this unity. Some people experience like a really, like sometimes it's darker energy or other aspects, and they are working through things. And sometimes it's like quite a painful or challenging experience. And there's a lot of wailing or screaming or like processing that's happening. So people experience this really, really differently. Generally though, at the end, you feel incredibly calm and relieved, not just that the experience is over, but you feel a sense of relief, a sense of weightlessness, like a sense that there's a weight off your shoulders. And so it's just, so it's just really different for different people. So that's the effect. That's the experience. Yeah. Right.
Okay.
In some ways, that's one version.
I'm going to pause you there. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to pause you there. That was really interesting. And lots to unpack there, but let me start with this. And you're not like an evolutionary biologist or a neuroscientist or anything, but like, let's just play this game. Okay.
Yeah.
We're these like bipedal mammals walking around with this like very big brain doing all this weird stuff with technology or whatever. We're very social. We've got this weird life.
Yeah.
And then there are these plants, right? Mushrooms or I don't know, DMT or the cactus or whatever that we consume because, well, it has some interesting kind of like spiritual healing effect on us to be, that alone could be unpacked at length. And then there's this molecule that somehow somebody discovered is contained in the venom of a toad, right? And then somebody realized you can try it and smoke it. And now it's so popular that the toad is extinct.
Well, there are very few toads to begin with, but yeah.
Explain to me, like what the hell that is? Why is it that these bipedal mammals want that? What's the deal? It's a very bizarre chain of events, right? Very unlikely series of things, and yet it's very, very popular.
Yeah, it's popular because, so again, like, like I said, like we could talk about the fireworks of psychedelics all day and that's fine.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's once you get comfortable in the experience, it is interesting and it is fun to explore the fireworks. But the reason these are such powerful experiences and the reason people seek these out, and a lot of people coming to our retreats are scared, they're scared shitless of coming to a retreat. Like they're very nervous about it, but they know that it's worth the challenge to go through. And the reason is that psychedelics help you really completely reframe your perspective on life in a way that I don't believe anything else on the planet can. And I think the way that we do that is by getting into our subconscious and our unconscious minds and really understanding how we're wired. So that's one thing. Like I think when you take mushrooms or you take ayahuasca or you're really able to explore the deep programming that we have. Then a lot of that programming comes from in the womb or before the age of 2 or, in our early childhood, or it's ancestral wiring, like that's passed through cellular memory. And so a lot of this stuff, we can't really access it through talking. So talk therapy doesn't get us there. We can sort of intellectualize it through talk therapy, but that doesn't allow us to really go into this material and explore it and understand it better. And when we start to do that, we start to realize that, wow, like all of that programming is like this restriction on what I see in my life and what I believe my life to be. And when we're able to start recognizing those restrictions and relaxing those, it just changes how life feels. So a lot of times people may have things are going well in their life externally, they're making good money, or they've got a great partner, or they're, like nothing external really needs to change, but the internal experience is one of loneliness, of confusion, of anger, of pain, of sadness, of depression, right? And so the internal experience just begins to change fairly dramatically through these experiences. So that's why people are doing this.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so some ancestor of ours before civilization,
Mm-hmm.
put us in the prison that we're all in right now, or whatever. Discovers this through eating a mushroom by mistake, or like is part of some healing ceremony in an indigenous tribe or something. And the experience is, like insight into nature and how we're programmed, or how we collectively, the patterns we collectively interface in. And that kind of creative insight unlocks certain potential, and we just feel more well. That's the general story?
Yeah, there's lots of ways to frame that, but yeah, I think that's the general story. Like one aspect of this, what you just spoke to too, is like understanding the nature of life. Like one of the things that our senses do, our sensory experience and our egoic experience does, is give us this impression that we're this independent thing, and that we're independent from all other life, other humans, the natural world, animals, all of these aspects. And it creates this level of separation. These experiences show us that separation is an illusion. Mm-hmm. And, there's a function of having an ego and being able to move through the world and do this kind of thing. But it also comes at a great cost to our well-being and our sense of connectedness. And when we look at all the symptoms of mental illness and all the symptoms of a lot of the activities that humans have undergone to kind of create a lot of the, global warming and all these kind of issues that we face, it comes from that disconnectedness. It comes from that sense that we are not all in this part of the same life. So I think these psychedelic experiences can help reconnect us in a way. And we see all the research coming out for all like depression and anxiety and all these different symptoms. But to me, those are surface levels. Everything kind of comes back to feeling connected to oneself and connected to those around you and to the natural world, feeling a sense of connection. And that's what these experiences, I think, offer.
Okay. Now, 5-MeO-DMT is sometimes referred to as the God molecule. Mm-hmm. Are we, what you just said, are we now approaching what people mean sometimes when they use that name for it?
I love talking about this subject. And I'll say that the word God was a huge trigger word for me basically my entire life. I've always considered myself an atheist. I don't anymore exactly, but I'll say that up to these experiences, I didn't really understand, what does God even mean? Like, is there some person in the sky who is making decisions and judging us based on whether we act within some certain moral code or any of that? We're not talking about any of that. Right. I think when we talk, so the God molecule, first of all, I think it's a really accurate name. It's in relation to the spirit molecule, which is DMT. So NN-DMT, the active ingredient in ayahuasca, is often referred to as the spirit molecule. And when you take DMT, or when you drink ayahuasca, I think it's a pretty accurate description to say that you enter into a spirit world. You enter into these layers of consciousness and awareness where there are beings and animals and creatures. And, really, a lot of people describe very similar visions when they're doing ayahuasca. 5-MeO feels like it transcends or passes through all of that into this kind of white light unity space. And so I think the word God to me is just talking about the connectivity of all life. When we talk about God, or when we talk about what this is all about, I think it's talking about that sense of unity, that sense of connection. So that's the way I describe it. And I think what I say to people is, like, you're going to experience something, and if you get to that sort of space, that unity space, I don't care what you call it. I don't care if you talk about it as, in scientific terms, we'd be talking about the quantum field, or perhaps something that exists within dark matter that we're still trying to figure out. there's a lot that material science has no idea what's going on. So, but we could be talking about the quantum field. We could be talking about God. We could talk about unity or consciousness, or use any word you like. Just interchange it, however makes you feel comfortable. And I think also, as soon as we start talking about that, there's a lot of people that go, why does that matter? I think we have a real disconnection from, what does spirituality even mean? Like, I have a lot of my buddies who, if I ask them, how would you define or talk about spirituality? There wouldn't be a word there. There wouldn't be anything to say. They wouldn't really know how to define that word. But I think, again, if you keep bringing it back to practical terms, to me, spirituality is feeling connected. It's feeling connected to your truest essence, who you are. It's feeling peace with yourself and with your surroundings. It's and you achieve that peace, and you achieve that sense of calm and groundedness within you when you're in alignment with those around you and with your natural environment. When you feel like you feel connected to those around you, and you're acting in accordance with that connection. So to me, it's like, it's all fairly practical, actually. But it's really important that we find some sense of connection, that we find some sense of spirituality, so that we can, I guess, just feel like our life has purpose and has meaning, and that we feel good when we wake up in the morning.
Okay. Before I get to my next question, what you just said, I want to linger there for a second, because I'm totally with you on this connection piece. And I'm with you on, that like spirituality and God and whatever vocabulary we use is like, a signpost to that experience. Totally fine. You just mentioned purpose and meaning or something. There was the last bit that you said. So there's more than connection.
I suppose I actually find that the word purpose, there's a lot of, I do a lot of mentoring, and I used to do a lot of speaking to young entrepreneurs, and I actually still mentor inside of high schools and stuff like that. One of the questions I get all the time from young people is like, how do you figure out what your purpose is? Yeah. And there's a lot of kind of mystery around this idea of what purpose is. And meaning, but I actually think it's usually fairly simple, that we feel purpose when we are in service to others. What we feel purposeful when what we are doing is generative to ourselves and to those around us. If we're doing something like, I believe, my guess is that you feel a lot of purpose in the work you do, because you get to interact with people every day, and you get to work on things that are making people's lives better. You are supporting life. And that, to me, is what purpose is. It just comes in many forms, and there's, just like humans are totally diverse in their interests, purpose is totally diverse in that way. So I think it's born out of connection with one's, like when you get connected to yourself, purpose is right there in front of you. It's not some mystery thing that you need to discover. As soon as you get connected and grounded, it's right there. Yeah.
Okay. So you mentioned a few times, both in this conversation and some of the other conversations we've had, that you think of your approach as practical. Okay, so let's dive into that for a second. A few years ago, I went to a meeting with a pretty well-known psychedelic entrepreneur who has a lot of resources, who was building something pretty big, very ambitious. And he was getting curious about 5-MeO-DMT. And I was with my friend Andrew, who you know, and this entrepreneur said, he wanted to know more about 5-MeO-DMT, and what are the opportunities here? And so he's asked us a bunch of questions. And at one point he said, so what indication do you think it would be useful for? And Andrew, who incidentally was a guest on the Mindspace podcast as well, he says, that's a tough one. I don't know. Being born? Okay. So I laughed just like that when he said it. Point of the story is it's not an especially practical compound, or let me direct the question slightly differently. What's happening in the psychedelic renaissance is that these things are like some of these compounds, MDMA or psilocybin, are going through like traditional clinical trials, like the pharmaceutical drug discovery process, and like interfacing with, you know, science and medicine and capitalism and consumerism, all this stuff. And like, I don't know, maybe MDMA as a treatment for PTSD is like a pretty good fit, and it actually works pretty well. And then, you know, ketamine is already out there. We have a ketamine program, and it's a 3-hour, you know, journey, and there's a pretty good evidence base. It's like, how do you fit, you know, these profound spiritual experiences into this box that the psychedelic renaissance is trying to pull them into?
Well, I'll just preface everything I'm going to say with, I don't care at all about the box. Okay. Like, part of what I think is challenging for me about the psychedelic renaissance, as you're framing it, kind of is super interesting, is that we're talking about this new frontier, or this new, you know, this whole new approach to mental wellness. And then we are measuring it by all the old ways of measuring mental wellness. So instead of saying, you know what, we actually need to talk about mental wellness in a completely new way, in a much more holistic or integral way, we're still going back to the DSM and saying, which box can I check with this drug? And how does that work? As opposed to like realizing the complexity of the human psyche and of all aspects of living a human life, in our internal and our external world, and all the pieces around it. We're saying, oh yeah, you can take this drug and it will solve this problem in 96% of people, or something like that. And I think what it does is it misses the whole point, again, of all of these things are just symptoms of a greater sense of lack of connection, you know, and that all of these medicines sort of do the same thing with just slightly different approaches. So where I think we should be talking about is, in which cases is MDMA the right approach, because it has a certain feel, it has a certain, like for PTSD, I think it's a great approach because it's fairly soft, right? And it's gentle in a way, so that if somebody is still dealing with easily being triggered into a trauma response, to me, it's a great vehicle to provide an altered state experience. Whereas 5-MeO-DMT might not be, because it's so intense that it may be just re-traumatizing or cause further trauma. So I think of all of my psychedelic experiences have been doing the same thing, and they're just helping me remember who and what I truly am. And they're helping me remember that I'm connected to everything, and that everything is important. Like every instant of my life is equally important, because it's the present moment. And that, to me, when you start to, if we can get down to those essences, then all of these symptoms just start to dissipate. I've dealt with kind of, I'm not bipolar, but like this kind of like bipolar depression my entire life, this up and down depression my entire life. And at times in my life, it was bad enough that I just didn't want to get out of bed for a week or two at a time, or I would just kind of be completely demotivated to do anything. And I knew in those times I started to learn about myself that I wouldn't make any decisions during those down periods, because I knew the decision would be framed in a really negative context that wasn't productive. All of that, like over the last few years, through a lot of personal work, but also through the psychedelic work and meditation and other aspects, is just, it's like, it's gone in my life. And I didn't go in going, I'm trying to solve my depression. I went in saying, I want to understand my own psyche. I want to understand my consciousness in a much deeper way. And then these other aspects kind of resolve themselves. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I'm sympathetic to your answer, although I am going to play devil's advocate here.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, if you think about, you know, I don't know, Western civilization, and the pandemic or the epidemic of mental health problems, depression. I'm actually totally with you on the cause, by the way. We got to find a way to sort of help people at scale. Okay. If I just take depression, and we can pick any one of the indications, any one of the boxes from the DSM, there's like millions and millions and millions and millions of people that need help. Okay. So it's like, there's this interesting molecule. It turns out it has to be like administered in a very safe and secure environment. Okay. So you got to build that out. You want to make sure that the molecule itself is the right one, that it's, developed or manufactured or grown in the right conditions.
Yeah.
And so it's not to say that the clinical trial process is perfect, or, manufacturing, or like, capitalist solutions to manufacturing drugs at scale are perfect. It's none of these things are even close to perfect, but we need some infrastructure and some systems for being able to do this at scale. Like, it's so, and if you'll forgive the cynicism here, it's so easy for you, Steve, you've got a nice place and you can host like 4 people at a time, and maybe you have a line on some good drugs or whatever, but it's like, that's not a sustainable way to do this. And these systems that we have in place are a way to make sure that the therapists are regulated. So, I mean, I trust you, and the people visiting your retreat space trust you, but you can't trust everybody. And so let's have some credentials and some regulations to make sure people are properly trained on how to keep people safe. That, again, the molecules are produced and distributed in a way that's accessible, that they'll be safe. And so, to some extent, processes and structures and infrastructure are important if we're going to get to a point where we could help enough people to move the needle. What do you think?
What do I think? I think a lot of things. First, okay, I guess I'll start by saying I get that Western civilization has a bunch of games we play and a bunch of things that we do. And so in order for these psychedelics that have been used safely for thousands of years to be considered safe by us, we need to spend billions of dollars and spend years going through academic and clinical and governmental regulations and doing all this thing. And so that's the game that we're playing. And I understand. And I also commend the folks who are willing to play that game, because it's an important step in bringing psychedelics to the world, because there are a lot of people that won't take psychedelics unless someone's wearing a white lab coat. And that's because that's how they measure safety, right? They measure safety by their belief in the institution, right? So I totally get that, and I respect it. And honestly, like, I'm just happy that, and I know I'm on kind of a Mindspace / Numinous podcast, and I'm not saying this for that reason, but like, I'm happy that Peyton and Numinous exist and trying to do this in a really meaningful way and has really personal experience to draw from when shaping this thing, right? So I get it. It's all good. I also think it's a little bit hilarious that we, again, have been taking mushrooms and ayahuasca and some of these natural substances forever. As long as we can find history, we find examples of it. Yet we somehow don't trust that it's safe unless our institution tests it for the next few years and says it's safe. I think it's I think that's basically ridiculous. And I hope that I hope and I believe that like Health Canada and our, in Canada, like that our federal government will see that at least with psilocybin as soon as possible, because we just know it's non-toxic. It's a safe substance. Yes, set and setting is important. And I'll get to those pieces, what you said, in a sec, but just that, like, it's arrogant and it's like extractionist to believe that we need to figure this all out ourselves from scratch. Like this, like when people use the word pioneering in this space, it's really interesting to me. Right. So I guess there's just a lot of complications and all of that. So I just feel like if we actually just looked to other cultures and other examples, we'd see that these have been used for a very long time. and make our conclusions from that.
Yeah. What I would say here, I mean, again, very sympathetic to your answer. What I would say though, is like, if you take the Sonoran Desert toad as an example,
yes.
The fact that, these like communications technologies, have made 5-MeO DMT so popular. And we live in kind of like where this information is circulating kind of like consumerist context,
Totally.
that we've just obliterated
Totally.
this animal off the face of the earth.
Yep.
So if I can say, we're operating in an environment where distortions or disruptions in natural processes that have kept things in balance over many, many millions of years, those distortions are creating a need for the institutions to then go and make things safe, right?
Well, that's where I would I actually think the institutions are also part of the problem, and it's not their fault, and they don't mean to be, but we are in a time where information is moving much faster than the institutions can. Culture, and thereby culture, is moving much faster than the institutions can. And so what's happening right now is everyone, like psychedelics, seem to suddenly, they're a palatable subject at most dinner tables. Maybe not most, but a lot more dinner tables than they were even a year ago or 2 years ago, right? Like, they're suddenly not this druggy thing that hippies do, or that the hippie kids in high school did. They're suddenly this thing of interest, right? And what's already happening is people are seeking out these experiences, and that's just going to keep happening. And so I agree with you. Like, the thing, I think we're very concerned about safety. We're very concerned about like efficacy as well, like beyond like just keeping someone safe and making sure that they don't have a highly dysregulating experience, but also, is the experience useful? And is there meaning and outcomes that can be gained from the experience, So all of those things are super important. I guess when I thought a lot about scaling in this space, because I mean, I'm an entrepreneur. I like to build things. I believe in the power of businesses to do these things. When I think about the scaling of psychedelics, I'm how do I say this? I guess the simplest way to say is, when I think about scaling psychedelics, I think about solving this problem. Is that what I've seen and what I believe is that when psychedelics are most effective when the person taking the substance and the person holding that space for that have a level of trust and of rapport with each other. They know each other well enough, and they've built enough trust, and the person has the right information. There's a connection there that, combined with the substance and this human connection, is tremendously powerful. And I would really love to see psychedelics scale, instead of scaling from this top-down institutional approach, which is really like, we are moving out of the centralized world. Like, this centralized world that we live in today is being disintegrated in front of us. We see it in the COVID, like in how COVID happened in the middle of how COVID happened. We see it in the politics, especially, you look at US politics and these things are just falling apart. We look at how institutional trust is at an all-time low. So for all of these things, like, we need to start looking at taking a more decentralized approach. We are not in an environment, and you see this in the crypto space, where there's trillions of dollars moving around in crypto, and the governments are still arguing over whether they acknowledge it or not, whether they acknowledge it as a real thing or not. The metaverse is about to be this whole new world that we move into, and the governments will be 20 years behind that. They're still trying to figure out how to regulate Facebook, right? And we're now moving into metaverse. So I think with all of these things, our traditional sort of top-down centralized approach to these things is not really serving us anymore. And when we look at the way healthcare is working, it's in certain ways, it's amazing. And in a lot of ways, it's not really serving us at all. It still doesn't connect mental health and physical health. It's still very much a reactive system that costs so much money because we let people get so sick before we'll treat them. Like there's all these things to understand. So I'm not polarized to say we should have no institutions. I think we need institutions. I think there's some need for that. I think that we need to modernize and think about that. And I also think we need to really look at how we can decentralize this process. Like we are moving into a time right now where, this idea of trust, because you mentioned that trust comes from institutions regulating people, right? And that's true for sure to a degree. And for the next 50 years or whatever, we're going to need that. And we have a new system being built where trust is being measured on the internet in a peer-to-peer fashion. And I know, for instance, like if we were doing things that were unsafe here, that word would be out very fast and it would be all over the internet, and we wouldn't get away with it. So I just think there's lots of nuance and there's lots of complexity there. And to say that we need big top-down regulatory institutions to do psychedelics, I think that's a very simplified response that doesn't really, I don't think that that's actually true. And I guess my biggest concern is that psychedelics get will be watered down a lot in the process of putting it, you're kind of putting it through filter after filter after filter. And each time you put it through a filter, some of that material is being left behind, and to the point where it becomes a sort of a sterile experience that may or may not include the proper human interaction to make it effective.
And again, very sympathetic to your point of view. My devil's advocate response would be like, like I said, I trust you. I think you're legit. And I've tried 5-MeO DMT. It's pretty interesting. But what really separates you and your molecule of choice from whatever cult where we all end up, killing ourselves or doing some really weird stuff? There's plenty of documentaries that you could watch on HBO or whatever of like exactly this reasoning.
Yeah.
But just applied to something else that's just much darker and much more dangerous.
Yeah.
So what's the difference? Why should we trust you?
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know you'd go there. That's like, I understand the question. Yeah, I actually think that like part of the transition we're in into this much more decentralized world where institutions just aren't keeping up. Like I think humans have been we've been offloading our sense of personal responsibility for a long time to organized religion. Some people end up in cults. Some people end up in pyramid schemes. Some people there are never ending traps in this world for people who are naive to what they are entering into. And that's a serious concern. I think one of the things that is absolutely crucial is that people start to wake up and say, you know what, I have to take responsibility for myself. I have to evaluate a situation in earnest. My hope is that with psychedelics, as they come online in particular, people seek out kind of like, what are the 10 questions you should ask of anybody that you sign up to go have an experience with? We're starting to create that information. We're building a learning platform. We're building a preparation platform to help people gain their own sort of sense of capacity and awareness as before they even do a psychedelic. And I think that's super key. And I think the things that separate us is that we're very clear, like that we are not, we don't insist on any sort of dogma or like belief about ourselves. We don't believe that what we're doing in any way, like all we're doing is creating a safe container for a human to come and experience this, like to have this experience and to heal themselves. We are there to basically shepherd and guide that experience. We actually refer to ourselves, like my wife and I, we refer to ourselves as doulas, because I think that's the best definition, in the sense that we are helping you go through a process that only you can really do. We've seen it a lot of times, so we can help support that, and we can provide some insight and advice and some guardrails. but that we're not healers who are magically making you better, and we are not making any promises about any of those aspects. Like that's, and anybody who is, somebody handed me a business card from somebody the other day, and it said Harry the Healer on it. And that was this shaman guy's name. And he's like, and right underneath it says shaman. And, and he's some dude. Shout out to Harry the Healer. You're probably a lovely guy, and I don't know you. And I don't know. Anyway, I just saw this business card, but it just made me think, like, I think we need to be really, and if you're entering into experiences, realizing like anybody who's promising that they will heal you, there's likely something to really explore inside of that kind of promise, So I don't know. I think discernment is super important. I think that asking for recommendations and like testimonials, and like we have a number of people who have been through our experience who are happy to get on a call with somebody who's considering it for themselves, so that they can understand. And I also just hope, and I hope that this is true for everybody working with psychedelics right now in an unregulated environment, which I understand the sort of the risks of. I just hope that everybody who's working in this environment really understands the responsibility that they carry. I'll say for us, every time a retreat happens, there is this tremendous sense of responsibility that begins a couple of weeks before the retreat, as I'm having my conversations with each person who's coming into it, as I'm starting to really get a sense of who they are and what's going on in their lives. We feel like we're holding them, and there's a tremendous sense of responsibility as they move through the experience on our property, that it's like when everybody leaves at 6:00 on a Friday, there is like this relief and this exhaustion that kicks in because we've been holding this space with such reverence and with such responsibility. It's a really interesting dynamic. I've never done anything in my life that's so exhausting, and it's not because I'm physically exerting myself in some way. It's because I'm energetically holding this responsibility for people. So I hope that guides, and anybody who says, hey, I've done mushrooms a few times, I want to guide my friends, just takes that really seriously.
Okay. So I think it's really interesting pointing to this issue of trust, and it is the breakdown in institutions, and it is the breakdown in our sense of connection and how we communicate and all this stuff.
Right.
That is, and even to the breakdown of like our understanding of like what is true. It's like, how dangerous is COVID? Do I need to wear a mask? I'm vaccinated. Am I at risk? Who won the election? It's like all this stuff, our sense of connection to what's really going on has been so degraded.
Yes.
That we're trying to find ways to figure out who we can trust. And what's also interesting is that your comment there about how it's when there is a connection based in trust that the psychedelics can have the most profound impact. And so, yeah, I'm with you. And I guess it remains to be seen how we're going to create trust in this iteration of using psychedelics in our society. I think this is a nice opportunity actually, again, to get practical and talk to you about how you create that container at the retreat center. When I did 5-MeO DMT, I had a guide with me, and, we weren't at a clinic. We were out in nature, and it was cool, but it was also like, okay, I hope it doesn't rain. And, I don't know what's going to happen. And like, how do I know this guy again? And like, it was all good, but there was a sense of like, he had to create a container so that I felt safe to kind of let myself go into it. And he had his practices around that. He lit this like special piece of wood that let off this interesting smoke, and he cleared away the spirits. And I was like, okay, I didn't really feel any spirits here, but that's cool, And then he had this like interesting like a dagger, the ceremonial dagger that had some kind of symbolic pointing to like insight and clarity, which I thought was pretty cool. So there were these interesting like symbolic attempts to create a meaning container that sort of felt a little arbitrary, or a little like, why is there smoke in my face here? I just sort of appealed to my own sense of like spirituality, or my whatever is meaningful to me from Buddhism, or my meditation practice, whatever. And that was the container I was creating for myself, but was not obvious, and wouldn't be obvious to people that don't have a background with these kinds of experiences. It's not regulated, right? It's new. So there's no history, there's no lineage, there's no rules and legalities. So you're starting from scratch, right? I'd love to know how you create the container, how you do prep and integration, making meaning out of the experience after. So yeah, big question there. Yeah. Feel free to start wherever you like.
Yeah. First off, just touching on the kind of the little aspects of the experience you just described, right? There's a lot of people doing this in Western context are drawing from indigenous contexts, or from South American traditions, tribal kind of stuff. And in some ways, there's like a real reversion in our society for a lot of people to this kind of like magical layer of consciousness where everything is a mystery and there's meaning in everything. And we're pulling that in with, like tarot and all these different aspects. So that's kind of prevalent right now. But I'd say with our ceremony in particular, we do use some sage. We burn sage and some other scents. Scent is a really powerful way to ground someone. So it's actually it's a powerful way of setting the ceremony. But in many ways, our approach to the ceremony itself is to have a very clear container. Very minimal, actually. So we create ceremony without a lot of the adornments or like religious idols or spiritual idols and artifacts and these kind of things, because we want the person to define what the experience, it means, and they can bring their own artifacts if they want. And if they're really into crystals and all sorts of things like that, they can bring those and put them on the altar. They can kind of put them at the head of the ceremony space, for themselves. But we really actually try to create a very clear container that doesn't pull in a bunch of these sort of foreign cultural references that don't necessarily resonate with somebody who grew up, in Vancouver in Canada or something like that, So I think that's really interesting to talk about. But in terms of preparing people, in terms of creating safety and trust, first off, we are virtually entirely referral based. So the first aspect of trust is that someone that they already trust says, I've had this experience, or I know someone who's had this experience and it was great, and I think it would be really useful. One thing that's really interesting about psychedelics is that once you've experienced it yourself, you have a sense of what you're entering into, and then you start to have a sense of the people in your lives that, are like, they're ready for this. They're seeking this in some way that they may not know that it's found in psychedelics, but they're seeking some spiritual connection, or they're seeking some healing, or they're working in personal development. And so you have this instinct towards telling those people about these experiences. So a referral, I find, is like a really powerful way to just, as a first screening mechanism and as a first trust building step. So pretty much we're all referral based. Second, people reach out, and we just, we have a short conversation just about some of the logistics and the details of the experience. We're very upfront about pricing and everything else to just make people feel like there's no mysteries here. Like, this is exactly how it works. This is who we are. And then if they're interested in the experience, we have them complete an intake form. And that intake form is thorough. It takes about 30 minutes to complete. And it looks at kind of all aspects of the person's psychological, spiritual, and physical well-being, family history, sort of the state of their life, where are they at, what's going on, what are the major kind of topic areas that are kind of consuming them, all those kind of aspects. And I actually find that people going through just completing that intake form, it starts to put the whole thing in context. Like, oh, interesting. I'm like, a lot of people have never answered some of the questions we asked before. So not only does it help them start to prepare themselves, but it also indicates to them that, oh, we're thinking about you. We want to know all we can about you. And that starts to build rapport even in itself. Anyway, we go through that intake form internally, and then we set up our first call with that person. I'll typically spend at least an hour in that first call talking to them. And we're kind of doing two things. We are talking about the experience itself, and I'll touch on that in a sec. But the other aspect is talking about them and going through their intake form together. And I usually there's just an instinctual, certain the way they might answer a question tells me, oh, maybe there's something a little more here that I want to unpack, or the language that they use to answer this question about their parents. What's going on there? And it just helps to build context and nuance and get to build some rapport between the two of us. But the other aspect is talking about the experience. And in terms of building trust, first off, I try to be as clear as possible about the intensity of this experience and make sure that they understand, they're not just doing this because their buddy told them it was going to be awesome. Or that their friend said, you need this, and they just took that at sort of face value. I really do my best to provide them as much detail as possible about the kind of intensity of the experience, what can happen afterwards, the sort of integration period, which can last weeks and months. Like we always say, you're coming to our spot here for a couple of days, but this is really a multi-month process you're entering into when you do a large psychedelic journey. And you have to be prepared. We're opening the box of your unconscious. You're accessing parts of yourself that you previously have never accessed. You're going to experience something you've never done before. That has ramifications. There's impacts to that. You will go back into your life next week, the week after, with a new sense of awareness. You likely are more sensitive than you were. You're signing up for a process, right? And so we just talk a lot about that and really help people just make sure that makes total sense to them, and that they're on board for that and they're signing up for that. So I feel like we're really clear about what people are enrolling in when they're coming to our experience. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And the way I'm describing it may make it sound like it's this big, super hard thing. It's not about that. It's just about, as soon as you start exploring your own psychology, you're kind of peeling back the layers, and underneath the layers is stuff that you didn't
more layers.
Yeah, more layers, stuff you didn't previously know. And if you're in a job you hate and you come have this experience, there's a good chance when you go back to that work, if your boss, you have a really bad relationship with your boss, or these dynamics, you're going to be more sensitive to them. They are going to feel more. You'll just see them with a new perspective and more clarity. And that clarity is something that people often are hiding from in their lives. Like, we consume alcohol, we smoke a lot of cannabis, we watch tons of Netflix, and we spend time on the internet. All of these things are distractions from having true clarity about everything that's going on in our life. So anyway, we just talk all about that, and we really try to make sure that people feel super clear about what they're enrolling in.
I don't know if you're done, but I want to jump in there on the clarity piece, because how do I articulate this? It's like, part of what is implied by what you just said. Mm-hmm. It's like, the more psychedelics you do, the more clarity you get. And I love actually the way you described it earlier, like when there are things that are already aligned, it really just accelerates movement in that direction. Where things are not aligned or stuck, you really get clarity on that. So that's all good. But I don't think it's true that the more psychedelics you do, the more clear things get. There are times where it gets ultra unclear, or maybe what becomes clear is there's just no bottom to this thing. So yeah, what would you say about that, about clarity, getting clarity through these things? Yeah, there's a lot of people that do 200 ayahuasca ceremonies and still never find any answers. That's right. And they're just chasing the dragon. That's right. With psychedelics versus any other substance or any other addiction. Right. So it's important. Yeah. There's nuance to all of that. I think that when you,
psychedelics can be both, like in certain cases be disrupting and kind of dysregulating, and can, like one of the things we're screening for, that's not directly asked, there's no way to ask this question directly, but through the intake process, through my first conversation with them, is to make sure that people have somewhat of a solid footing in their life. Like they are not, like they're functioning in their life, that they're not, if they have issues going on, or if they have trauma they're working with, or if they're dealing with any mental health issues, that they have some awareness about them, and they're not bypassing these aspects. And they're in a place where a really strong psychedelic experience is not going to just completely, dysregulate their life. Like they're not going to go back in their life feeling like they've been blown into a whole bunch of pieces, and functioning becomes even more difficult. I think that is one of the challenges with psychedelics that you need to be aware of, is that, these are very powerful tools, right? So in those cases, it can feel like, man, there's no clarity. Suddenly I feel like, holy shit, there's all these layers that I didn't even know existed to my existence, and to consciousness, and to the universe, and like maybe dimensions are real. And, the fun thing about the universe is, like, science has never been able to find the smallest thing or the biggest thing in this universe. You can kind of go down rabbit holes on this. So you have to be careful about that. What I, at least in my own experience, and with most people virtually all the people we've worked with, is that when you're doing this with the right intention, with the right preparation, with the right understanding of what you're actually entering into, there is a level of clarity that comes from these experiences, in that, like, all we're really trying to do is help people practice being more sensitive to their surroundings, to their inner surroundings, and to their outer surroundings. We're helping people build awareness, and trying to help them feel comfortable being fully awake in every moment of their life, which is kind of drawn from, say, Buddhist ideologies and things like that, but Buddhist philosophy. So it is really trying to help people feel comfortable being clear in each moment. And what we find is a lot of people quit nicotine. They're drinking, the amount they drink drops quite a lot. Like, a lot of habits start to shift. They start spending more quality time with their partners, or they with their children. Like, these are the natural outcomes of building a level of sensitivity and awareness of your surroundings and of yourself that are natural. Like, for me, it's really driven my drinking to almost zero. And I have drinks here and there, and it's a fun substance once in a while to engage with. But for the most part, I don't, like, throughout my days and my weeks, I never want to have like a beer at the end of the day or a glass of wine at the end of the day, because I want to be present in my body. I want to feel really clear about where I'm at and what's going on. I want my mind to feel clear, and I want to feel all of my emotions. I want to feel it all, and I feel like psychedelics can help us build that capacity and understanding. So I think that's available to you. It's not always the outcome.
I would have a question that kind of riffs off of that, unless you wanted to speak more about how you do, like, prep and integration. I think we do need to spend some time on integration. So
yeah,
I'll come back to my question.
Okay.
So maybe you were on a nice kind of like overview of the trajectory of the thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have that first conversation. People then go away and decide whether they want to come, or like whether it makes sense. If they do, we get some dates locked in for them. We then typically have there's another sort of longer conversation as well as we lead up to it. We've created materials that we provide that help them think about how to prepare for the experience in terms of each psychedelic, I would say, is slightly different, but there's certain similarities. With 5-MeO in particular, you definitely want to have your nervous system in as good a shape as possible. So it's a very intense experience. So you want to be as calm and as grounded and as well slept as possible. So, we make those kind of recommendations, and we help sort of set them up on a path for the couple of weeks leading up to the experience. We don't have really strict dietary expectations, mostly that you're eating things that like as many whole foods as possible. If you are eating meats, that they're wild and that they're happy animals, and that they're not full of chemicals and stuff like that. So we're just helping them basically prepare their mental, physical, and spiritual selves. We also, in the week ahead, we're sending out various short readings or little, like a poem with some prompts, basically just journaling activities and reflective activities that help them continually refine and frame their intention with why they're coming. One of the things we also just really always tell people is intentions are great, expectations are not. When you set expectations around an experience of this magnitude, it really sets you up for, it's just a trap of the ego to say, oh, I really expected this conversation to be about, like, if I had big expectations about what I was going to talk to Joe about and we don't talked about that, then it was a failure, then it didn't work, then it wasn't what I expected. So we talk about that. And then I think the other piece we do in terms of building trust, though, is that we have people with us for over 3 days for this experience. Mm-hmm. And everybody arrives at the same time on the first evening. We have dinner together. We all sit together as a group in person. And we actually just talk about a lot of the same things we've already covered, but we just go through it again and we get to know each other and we ask some questions and everybody shares a bit about why they're there. And we build some trust as a group and build some safety as a group. Our retreats are all technology free, caffeine free. So we basically lower all the stimulants as much as possible and create an environment where you're not only psychologically feeling confident and safe and secure, but your nervous system is just dropping down a notch. We're in nature, we're away from all technology. We like the lights are nice and chill. So like everything is just designed to help you sleep well and feel calm. And then through the experience, I mean, there's lots of ways that I think we could dig into some of the experience, like how the actual ceremony works if you want. I think coming out of the experience, so the day after the actual 5-MeO ceremony, we do a group breathwork session, and these are sessions that we've designed. Like I've built all the music for. My wife and I have worked on that, so it's custom produced for this experience, and it's really powerful for people to be able to use breathwork to basically get back into this altered state, very similar to their 5-MeO experience the day before, but without the substance. And like, so there's no substances involved, and that, so it's a little bit less overwhelming as, you know, inhaling this 5-MeO and like within 10 seconds, you're like on a different, you know, dimension entirely. Breathwork really eases you into it. So it allows people to process and really kind of articulate the meaning and extract more. It's just really useful to work through some of the context of the experience and to be fully in control of that experience through your breath. After that, we sit in a group. We do a couple different integration exercises that are just kind of conversational. And then we sauna, we cold plunge. We have a beautiful brunch. My wife is a chef, so all of the meals at our retreat are incredibly, like, they're just beautiful and they're healthy and everything's gluten-free and dairy-free. And like, it's like the food is a big part of the experience, actually. So we have a big brunch together. And then in the afternoon before people take off, I basically do a one-on-one session with each person to just make sure that they're feeling confident and comfortable about, you know, going home, and that there's a plan in place. So sometimes it's quite practical. Some people know, like, oh man, as soon as I get back to work, this is going to happen, and how do I manage this situation, or how do I think about this? Sometimes people know that there's a bigger change that they're going to want to make, and we start to strategize about how to do that in a responsible, safe, effective way. We always say, like, no huge life-changing decisions for 7 days, just because you want to make sure that you're doing it in a practical way that's respectful to the people who are involved with that decision. But that's less common anyway. I think more so the conversations are just about, what are you going to do to maintain your connection to what you felt here at this retreat? How are you going to do that on a daily basis? I find that integration is not, it's it's quite simple. It's like really focused around mindfulness and around presence and around small daily habits, you know, whether it's a short meditation in the morning, a walk sometime throughout the day in nature without distractions, maybe a journaling practice, maybe a check-in practice, maybe you start to structure your work slightly differently. But it's these small changes that then really impact how your life feels. And oftentimes we have like couples show up together. So we're doing thinking about how can we create a step in your day where the two of you sit down together and look each other in the eye and share something meaningful, or reflect with each other, or how can you just sort of deepen the connection that you both have as you go back into your life. There's, you know, we recently had a couple here who generally things, you know, are going well. They both have good jobs. They have lovely kids. They live in North Van. They're doing great. They're also feeling like a lot of pressure, financial pressure. They feel like, you know, having young kids and both working, and it puts strain on their relationship. They weren't feeling cohesive as a unit. And this experience just really helped them reframe that. And all these little changes that shifted for them going back into their regular life, within 2 weeks, their kids were going to bed earlier. They were connecting better in the evening. You know, like they were fighting less. They had cut out caffeine. Their technology habits had shifted. They had made choices they were thinking about selling their house and buying a bigger house. They decided that was just going to put more stress on them. So they realized they loved their house. So, you know, all of these things, like these very practical shifts happened, and they feel better every day. And so oftentimes that's what the conversations are about. And once in a while, the conversations are more of like a mystical, spiritual, philosophical conversation, because somebody's just really trying to process, like, what was that I saw? You know, what does it mean? And then afterwards, basically everybody's in a groups, like a group chat, so we can stay connected. And we ask people to share updates daily, and people are sort of interacting with one another. I have a scheduled call with them, usually within the first 10 days. Sometimes it's sooner, sometimes it's a little later, depending on just where they're at. And then we basically let our participants know that we are on call for them for the next 2 weeks. So beyond like our scheduled call, if you need us, you just send us a message or pick up the phone. And I think just knowing that we're there for that is really reassuring for people as they go back into their life. In terms of ongoing integration, I know this is a long answer, but I think in terms of ongoing integration, in many cases, we begin a longer term engagement with people where we're working with them over a number of months to think about their lives and how to continue integrating. And we're starting to, in the new year, we'll be launching also a platform that creates basically like community circles and places where you can come and talk about what's going on with others that have gone through the same experience that can kind of relate to you. Because I think one of the biggest challenges with integrating psychedelics in our society, at least at this point, is that often you're the first of your friends, or you don't necessarily feel like you have many people around you that can really understand what you're going through, or that what you've gone through. And so I find that having community is such a key piece of this. So we're looking at ways to increase the level of community that our participants have.
That's awesome. We are over an hour and a half here, and I just, really appreciate all the time that you've made available for us. Maybe I'll try to squeeze in one more question for you. And it's actually the question I kind of parked earlier. And when you were talking about like an intention or a purpose, or the sense that with the participants, what you're hoping people achieve is a sensitivity and this clarity and a capacity to be at peace with, what you're seeing with that clarity. Okay. Now, what is it about that is so meaningful to you that you are now dedicating your life to bringing that about, or helping people approach that outcome? And, I asked you at the beginning, what do you do?
Mm-hmm.
And you also talked about when you feel connected and integrated, that sense of purpose is right there.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if we can kind of tie all that together. Is there a sense of purpose for you in this work that you're doing?
Yeah, I feel so lucky to be doing this work. And it feels like the culmination of all the things I've done in my life. It really does. It is a thread that has always been part of who I am. I've always been fascinated with my own understanding and perception of life and of my own psychology and well-being and self-development. So that's always been for me. And I've always been passionate my whole life since I remember in high school, I was talking to an old high school friend recently, and she said, "Oh yeah, you were always that guy in high school, like who was like trying to like share concepts and help people like figure things out." And I didn't remember that about myself, but it was interesting. And then I started kind of unpacking that. I realized you're right. Like this has always been something I'm passionate about. And then I'll say that through being an entrepreneur and running companies and having employees and having, larger team, by my last company, I had quite a few people that I was responsible for. But what I realized, like part of the reason I sold the company was I realized that what I was actually most passionate about every day was the individual and how I could help them find the greatest expression of themselves and how I could help them see life, see a fuller picture of life and enjoy themselves and just activate themselves. And so that's all I really did as a boss. Like I wasn't, I was more of a mentor and a coach to people than I was a boss. And I just realized that in some cases that worked really well. In other cases, that was the wrong forum for that type of engagement with people. Right. And it led to just some confusion. And sometimes I would also let people that were not doing their job be there a lot longer because I was trying to crack the egg and I was so passionate about trying to help this person, get to the next, their next evolution, kind of moment. So it's just something I've always been passionate about. And, to me, it's there's sort of like a micro and a macro part of this. The micro is like, there's nothing more rewarding for me to somehow just create the conditions or prompt someone with the right question or the right, experience so that they have this aha moment about what's possible in their life and how they can, be a better human and have a better experience. And there's just, it's incredibly rewarding. And on a macro level, I feel that when this happens, like we see the ripple effect. We see the intergenerational effect of this. We see a guy who has this experience with us, realizing the sort of pain in his relationship with his father and realizing that he is showing up that way to his 2-year-old and realizing that, oh my God, I'm never going to do that again. And healing that part of himself and therefore having this impact on his children. And you just think about how that cascades out. Like we are in this amazing time where we can actually do this work, and the ripple effect in our society and how we show up as humans and how we support one another is just, I mean, there's nothing more rewarding I could imagine doing. And interestingly, as somebody who's worked in technology a lot of my life, a lot of my time before this was spent thinking about how I can build roles for myself and companies and things that are, kind of autonomous and asynchronous, so that I have total freedom to travel and, all this kind of like Tim Ferriss lifestyle stuff. And I think there's something about that that's great. But what's so interesting is that I've, intentionally and very meaningfully entered into this new phase of my life where my time is constantly spent with humans in physical time and space. And I have like it's a tremendous, it's a total shift. I don't have the freedoms I used to have, but the work is so meaningful that there's freedom within that. There's freedom within being able to do this work. And so I guess I've like let a part of my old, like, oh, I want the perfect lifestyle where I can travel all the time and my company makes money while I sleep sort of mentality, which is the dream of all tech entrepreneurs, really. Like, and to realizing, oh, the more quality time that I can spend with humans and the more that I can do this, like that's where I get energized. And so I just feel really lucky to be doing this. Yeah.
That's awesome. I feel pretty lucky that you're doing this too. I hope you keep going and scale it as best you can.
Well, yeah, I'll say about scaling, like I really believe that the way psychedelics, I just hope that psychedelics find a way to scale in small peer-to-peer ways like that, like I think that this can scale by us creating excellent protocols and excellent process and then passing it on to other couples and other small groups and who are doing it in their community. And that instead of it being this sort of like one company owns the whole landscape, like an Amazon or something like that, there's just thousands of small practitioners in their communities, and they have the right ethical standards, and they have the right learning and training, and they have the right tools and systems, and that they can implement this. Because back to like psychedelics are most powerful when they're when they are done in connection with deep trust, and that really I think happens on a kind of a community level. And so that's my dream for psychedelics. Like I hope that we continue to figure out how to do that while this whole economic machine kind of comes in and does its thing with psychedelics as well. You know, it's a funny dance we're all doing.
All right, man. Again, appreciate it. A good chunk of your day. Really worthwhile as far as I'm concerned. So thanks a lot. Yeah. And I'll talk to you again soon.
My pleasure. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks for watching this episode of the Mindspace podcast. To get more episodes, you can subscribe on this channel or go to your favorite podcast platform. Thanks, and be well.